So to start with, I'd like to first just congratulate all of you for making Law Review. As most of you probably already know, my name is Heather Caro and I'm the Lexis account representative for your school. So the purpose of this training today is to help you find an original, unique, and relevant topic for your note or comment that you'll be writing. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to take a look at all the tools on Lexis Advanced that can help you. First, we're going to go through some searches that you could run if you'd like to find a comment topic, and then we're going to switch gears a little bit and find some possible topics for a note that you might want to write. Then we're going to talk about what preemption checks are and how to run them on the topic that you choose. So at the end of the presentation, you're going to feel a lot more confident knowing where to look on Lexis to be able to find these topics, but also how to do your preemption check, which is something that you have to go through before you can start researching and writing your note or comment. All right, so selecting a topic for your note or comment can be a very challenging and time-consuming task. So basically, I've divided this training into two different components. First, how to find an interesting and unique topic, and then how to conduct a preemption check. So before we're going to jump into either, there are a couple preliminary considerations that you should think about when you're choosing a topic. The first thing, make sure that you choose something that is interesting to you. So I had a friend in law school that chose a topic that was very controversial and completely relevant at the time because we were in Louisiana at the same time that the oil spill happened in the Gulf of Mexico. But to be honest, it was completely 100% boring and dull to her. So unfortunately, it had followed her not only through law school because she spent about a year and a half writing her note, but also it's been following her through her legal career. So even when she was interviewing, potential employers all wanted to discuss it. And so if you get published, just remember that this is going to follow you forever. And people will think that it's something that you're interested in. And so why not make a topic selection based on something that will be interesting to you and you'll also be entertained by when you're doing the research. The second thing you should think about is you have to raise an argument. So a lot of people are going to get passed over for publication simply because they fail to raise an argument in their note. So if you select a note, make sure you're raising an argument. And then another thing that you definitely have to think about is make sure that you're thinking current, unique, and analytical. So that's going to ensure that one, you have enough information to write on, and then two, that it isn't a stale topic. So we're going to talk about preemption checking, but if it's unique and current, then it probably means that it hasn't necessarily been covered yet. Therefore, you wouldn't be preempted and you could still choose that as your topic. So the first thing that we are going to take a look at are how you can find some possible comment topics. And so if you look at the handout that you should have received, if you're trying to figure out if you should write a comment or a note, there is a little part at the top of the handout that covers the difference between the two. And then some preliminary considerations specifically geared toward comment selection, and then others geared directly toward note selection are on that handout as well. So you might want to take a look at those. But first, we're going to start with some comment searches that you can run to look for possible topics. All right, and before we run any of these searches, just remember that all the searches that we're running and that I'm doing throughout this training are on the handout. And so if you want to just go over and take a look at that, remember you're going to have all of those additional considerations for comment selection and note topic searches. But in addition to that, you have these actual searches that you'll need to run to find your own topic. And so the first place that we're going to look once we come over to Lexis Advanced for a possible comment topic is looking at cases that have either been reversed or have a dissenting opinion with them. And so the search to find those types of cases would be typing in reverse/25, so within 25 words of judgment or decree and not affirm. And so remember, and not is another term that you can use as a connector on Advance to say we do not want the term affirm to appear within any of our results. And so when we run that search, the Cases tab will automatically be opened for us. And you're going to see we come back with over 10,000 results. And so a huge number, but there are a couple filters that you can apply that are really going to help you narrow down to get to the results that are most relevant. thinking back to one of those preliminary considerations we talked about being current and unique. And so the first thing that you would want to do if you scroll down to our filters is narrow it down to U.S. federal for your jurisdiction. And so if you click on the More drop-down menu, that'll display the other jurisdictions. And so they're all in alphabetical order. So if you come down to U.S. federal, that'll narrow us down. You can see we're still over 10,000 cases, but that's why you would then want to look at the timeline, or even if you had a specific circuit that you want to look at cases from. But the other filter to point out here is this timeline filter. And so remember, you can grab this little drag arrow at the bottom of the timeline and pull it over to specific dates. And so you can see as I'm dragging it in the box below, the dates are changing. And so maybe you just want to knock it down to the previous 2 years. So let's go back to 2013 to 2015. And if I click OK, it's going to go through my results and only give me those cases from the last 2 years. So now I'm not going to have a stale issue. So I'm not going to be looking at cases that maybe came up 10, 15 years ago. But the other thing that you probably would want to do is pull up the highest court cases at the top of your results. And so in this sort by drop-down list, if you go down, you can select court highest to lowest, and that'll rearrange all of your results to put the U.S. Supreme Court cases at the forefront and leave everything else after. All right, so just know that if you want it, you could then further narrow it down to circuit courts or even to just cases that discuss a particular issue that you're interested in. And so that other filter to do that type of search would be the search within results. So if you had a specific topic, remember, think creatively here. So let's just say maybe you wanted to see cases that specifically talked about baseball and immigration. So if you typed in those additional key terms into this search within results box, any of the results remaining would have to have those additional terms. So think as creatively as possible, but also make sure it's something that you're interested in. All right, so that is the first search, or the first search that you could run to find possible topic ideas. The other cases that you can look at are cases of first impression. And so first impression is basically a new legal issue or interpretation that is being brought before a court in which that issue has never been addressed. So there's no binding authority on that matter from that court or that jurisdiction. And so to run that search very quickly, you would just type in first impression, put it in quotes, and hit enter. From there, once again, you would want to start narrowing it down. So you can see we pulled back a ton of cases of first impression, but we're only interested in the most recent ones because we don't want it to be a topic that's already been written about. So if we come back down to that timeline, maybe you want to narrow it down to the last year or two. So we're going to do a 2-year filter again. So click OK. I've narrowed it down 2013 to 2015. The other filters that you would probably want to use here would be maybe a circuit filter. So if we want to look at cases of first impression from our specific circuit, if I come down to courts, click on expand, I can narrow it down to 11th Circuit cases of first impression. And so now we've narrowed it down to 237 results. Maybe, again, you wanted to narrow it then down, or not narrow it, but resort through your results and put the highest cases up at the top. So select that option under the sort by menu. And so now you're going to have the highest cases from the 11th Circuit at the top. Once again, if you wanted to maybe type in some key terms to see if there were cases on a topic that's just coming out and starting to be discussed, within that search within results box, if you typed in those key terms, it would then reduce the number of results you have based on those key terms that you've typed in. All right, and so those are the 2 searches that you can use to find possible comment topics. The next thing that we're going to do is take a look at note topic searches that you can run to find topics if you were interested in writing a note. So once you've gone through the preliminary considerations of selecting a note topic, what are some searches that you can run? Once again, these are all in the handout, and the searches we're going to run can be found there as well. So the first thing, or the first search that you can run, is looking for unresolved points of law as topic for circuit splits. So what is a circuit split? Well, a circuit split is going to address an unresolved issue that could end up before the Supreme Court, and therefore it's a great topic. Circuit splits essentially scream note topics. A lot of people choose that as a route whenever they're selecting their note. So, for example, if the Second Circuit says X and the First Circuit says Y, you can discuss both of those courts' opinion in your note, the impact that those opinions are going to have or have had, and then also how the issue should be resolved. And so to look for circuit splits, if we come up to the red search box again and type in circuit within two of split or disagree, and run that search. Whenever it opens the Cases tab, so we're still staying in the Cases tab, but once again, we're going to need to start applying some filters. The first one is coming down. Let's go ahead and select a federal jurisdiction again. So coming down, look for U.S. federal. That focuses us down to 15,000 cases that deal with circuit splits. But remember, you really want to narrow it down to maybe opinions from the last year or so. And so if we go back down to that timeline filter, I can move that little arrow over and just focus on everything from 2014 to 15. Click OK. Maybe once again, you wanted to pull up some of the highest court opinions at the top of your results, so use the sort by menu. Then that's where you're going to have to pick the topic that's really interesting to you, because right now we're just in general looking for all circuit splits. And so if we scroll down, remember that search within results box is where you can put in some key terms of an issue or a topic that's interesting to you. So let's just say we wanted to look at cases or circuit splits concerning class certification and class representatives. So how would we do that? So in the search box, once again, let's go ahead and we're going to do circuit within two of split or disagree within 25 words of class within 2 words of certification. So once you hit enter, it goes through those 15,000 remaining results and narrows us down to 14 cases specifically talking about class certification and class representatives and what the dispute has been there. Maybe you wanted to take it a bit further. 14 cases is definitely manageable, but maybe you also wanted to type in class representative, hit enter, and now we've narrowed it down a little bit further. And so that gives us the most recent cases discussing circuit splits concerning class certification and class representatives. Another search that you can run is to look for legal news on recent cases. So researching a potential note topic in the news is an excellent way that you can identify both something that's current and things that are evolving in the legal world. But how do you or I know what a cutting-edge controversial topic is? We don't. So unless we heard something maybe on the news when you're getting ready in the morning, or if your professor mentioned something, basically we need someone to tell us what these cutting-edge controversial topics are. So if you have a recent case that's interesting to you and contains a legal controversy, the quickest way to investigate it and its issues is to run a search in the news. So let's just say that you're interested in the recent Alabama Black Legislative Caucus Supreme Court case that you heard about. You don't know both parties and you don't have a citation. One of your professors maybe just mentioned it in class. So if we just come up to the top and you put some of those key terms in, I'm going to put this in quotes, but we're going to look for Alabama Legislative. Make sure if you're putting anything in quotes, remember it has to be spelled correctly. So Alabama Legislative Black Caucus. Close my quotes there and run a search. So the first place that we could look is immediately here in the Cases tab, because we can see that that was a party in 18 cases. If I look to the second one, you'll notice the jurisdiction. This is the Supreme Court opinion from March 25th, 2015. That first one that mentioned the Alabama Legislative Black Caucus was from December, and that was actually from the Alabama District Court. So if you wanted to open up that case, remember in the About This document box on the right-hand side of the screen, you're going to get a lot of additional information concerning that case. One of which is the related court materials. So if you wanted to go ahead and take a look at the briefs, that could be a great source to help you determine an exact argument that you want for your note. So remember, if you're selecting a note topic, you have to make some type of argument or you'll be passed over for publication. So if you want to figure out the exact argument you want to focus on, the briefs would certainly be a great place for you to find that. Another place that you could look, because remember we were talking about legal news, is in the legal news results. And so let's go back to our results page, and all of the different types of materials that we have dealing with the exact topic we were searching for are all tabbed out up here at the top. But if we come down to legal news, just remember that you're going to have access to over 26,000 different sources. And so maybe you wanted to narrow this down or focus it on the most recent articles. So date newest to oldest would certainly be a good filter that you would want to apply to get those most recent articles up at the top. Maybe you wanted to come down and type in some additional key terms. If you wanted to focus on news articles coming from a specific state, you could focus down on those through the filters as well. The only other place that I would maybe suggest, if you have a specific recent case that you were looking for or looking at, go look at the secondary materials and see what's already been written about that case. So if they already have a ton of law review articles that have discussed the case that you wanted to talk about, take a look at the secondary sources and figure out what remains to be discussed. So what other articles haven't discussed. Okay, so that's how you can use legal news to search for a recent case or a topic. All right, the third search that you can run is using legal news searches on challenged pieces of legislation. Many notes are written on a piece of legislation that's being challenged in the courts. So whether it's state or federal, it is a great search that you can run to find challenged pieces of legislation. A note on a challenged piece of legislation is going to specifically explore that piece of legislation, how the courts have interpreted it, and the impact of that dispute. So here's how you can search to find a challenged piece of legislation. Coming back up to the top search box, if we type in law or legislation or statute within 25 of challenge or lawsuit and run that search, we would then want to go down to the legal news in our filter side on the left-hand side of the page. From there, you would definitely want to use your timeline, because remember, whenever you're thinking about those preliminary considerations, you want something that is current. So we don't want something from 2 years ago. It's probably a stale issue. It's not really of much significance anymore. It's something that has probably already been written on. And so you definitely want to pick a topic that is current and never been written on before. You have a better chance of being selected for publication. And so if we come down to the bottom, adjust that timeline to the last year or so, and then you can further, through the legal news results, tell the system exactly what source we want our results to come from. And so Law 360 is a media outlet that's going to publish over 160 articles every business day. And those articles essentially cover the breaking news and all of the in-depth issues across all 40 plus area of law practices and legal industries. And so it's used by legal professionals. All of the top 250 largest law firms use it to keep current in their practice areas. And it's just a great source for you to go to for a note topic and to stay current on whatever the legal news and trends are of the day. So if we narrowed it down to Law 360, if you wanted the most recent articles, remember that sort by, you can narrow it to newest to oldest. And so you'll have the most recent articles, the ones that are coming out today, available to you at the top of that list. All right, I should say the fourth place that you can look for a possible note topic is in the news and searching for issues or jurisdictions that are specifically of interest to you. And so if we go ahead and type in first impression, within 25 of, let's say, we want to know first impression cases from the 11th Circuit, run that search, go back to the legal news tab like we just looked at for the previous search we ran. Maybe you want to narrow it down to Law 360 articles again, and then narrow it down to articles from maybe the last year, or maybe even less if you wanted to keep it really current. All right. The fifth place that you can look for a possible note topic is within legislative materials. And so newly enacted legislation can be a potential note topic as long as it's controversial and it's interesting. The reason is recent legislation is really going to provide insight as to what issues may be examined judicially in the very near future. So if you select legislation that has a significant amount of discussion in the legislature, you have a good chance of being selected for publication. The one thing is, you want to be very careful if you select pending legislation as the central issue of your note, because if that pending legislation does not become law, your note won't become an article. So essentially, whenever something dies in the legislature, your note kind of dies with it. And so I'm going to show you guys a couple searches, though, how you can avoid looking at pending legislation. So 2 different things you can do here. You can either look for federal legislation or state, depending on which one you want to focus on. And so I'll show you how to do both. So the first one we're going to look at is federal legislation. So in the search box, I'm going to type veterans or service members or armed forces. So if I was interested in finding out what legislation is out there regarding those specific key terms, once you get your results, we want to look at the Statutes and Legislation tab. So click that one right beneath Cases. And just as before, you have to start using filters. And so if you come down to the Narrow By box, the first filter that you have to look for or you have to apply is bill tracking under the category. So let's go ahead, narrow it down to bill tracking. Because I said we were focusing on federal legislation, we would want to come down to jurisdiction and go ahead and select U.S. federal again. So now we've narrowed it down to all of the bill tracking reports, specifically with federal jurisdiction. And then we would want to narrow it down to the last 2 years. So dragging that bar over again, let's look at January 2012 to current. And so click that. All right, so now we've narrowed it down to all of the legislation out there, specifically dealing with veterans or service members or members of the armed forces. Remember I said, though, that some of this could be pending. So how do you ensure that the bills have become law? And because we're looking at federal legislative materials, if we come into the search within results box, if you look for the specific terms signed by the president anything that's been signed by the president is law, and so therefore we don't have to worry about that pending legislation. You're kind of playing with fire. It is great if you do find a piece of legislation that is currently pending because it's a hot topic. It's kind of a race. So as long as you finish your note before anything happens with it, you could very well be selected for publication. But just remember, if you're not typing in signed by the president or for the state legislation signed by the governor, there's a chance that your note will die if that pending legislation doesn't come to fruition and actually become law. All right, so to find federal legislation, just remember, narrow it down to your federal jurisdiction. Similarly, if I wanted to find state legislation, maybe marijuana is kind of a hot topic right now and where it's legal and where it's not. So if we run a search for marijuana, then we come back over and click on our Statutes and Legislation tab. We want to do a lot of the same filters as before. So coming down, we want to look specifically at bill tracking. But this time, remember, we were looking at state legislation. So if you wanted to see what Florida legislation has to say about it, you could focus it down there. Maybe Colorado, we know that was one of the leading states with this. They were kind of the ones who started it. You can narrow it down to them. And then once you go down to whichever state specifically you were looking at, remember, if you want to make sure that the bill has become law, make sure that you go into that search within results box and you then do signed by the governor. So just like you did signed by the president, signed for the governor for state legislation. All right, and those are the 5 different places or searches that you can specifically look for a note topic. And so we looked at legislative materials, we looked at specific issues or jurisdictions of interest. Remember, we looked at challenged pieces of legislation. If you have a specific case, you can look in the legal news for that. And then the very first one that we looked at were circuit splits. Okay, so once you've gone through and you've picked your topic, you're not done yet. And so now begins the fun part of preemption checking. Preemption checking is the most important part of the entire publication process. A thorough preemption check is going to assure the originality of an article. So the more original your article is, the more likely it will be selected for publication. And so remember that preemption checking isn't a one-time proposition. It's an ongoing research process. What does it mean to be preempted? The straightforward definition of preemption is that you cannot write a comment on a topic about which someone else has already written. So it sounds really simple in theory, but it's a little bit more complicated in practice. And so some rough guidelines that you should definitely think about when you're looking through your preemption check are these. And so the first one is, let's say you come across an article that's been written on your topic, but it was written 5 years ago, and several new and interesting things have occurred since then regarding your topic. Then you're not preempted. So if your article is making, let's say, the same argument, but it comes to a different conclusion because there have been changes in the law, then you are not preempted in that topic. Second consideration is if you find an article that's been written on your topic, but it's written on the pro side and you want to write on the con side, you're not preempted. The one caveat, though, that you have to remember, your con argument has to have some sort of unique analysis or validity on its own. It can't simply rehash the pro side of the argument with a few statements of how the other argument is wrong. It has to be able to stand on its own. The third thing to consider, if you find an article that is 6 sections long and one of those 6 sections is on your topic, you're not preempted. So the thought essentially is if an article that was 5 or 6 different sections in length, only one of them covered your topic. If your entire topic was covered in one section and they said everything that you had to say about your entire article that you wanted to write, then you probably didn't have a topic in the first place. Because remember, a lot of these articles are going to be 20 plus pages in length. So if they were able to discuss and argue the entire topic within one section, then you really weren't going to be able to write 20 pages about it and come up with a good article that would be selected for publication. All right, the fourth thing to think about is if you find an article that has a similar setup or introduction as your article, that doesn't automatically preempt you. So comments or notes will typically have similar setups or histories and initial descriptions at the beginning. But if the meat of whatever your topic is, so whatever the biggest issue that you're discussing is different than the other articles that you've come across, you can still write on it. So just because the first paragraph or two are almost the same, it doesn't mean that you're preempted because you're discussing a different issue. The fifth consideration is, let's say you find an article that has a different argument than you, but it comes to the same conclusion, then you're probably not preempted. So in fact, it's probably a good thing since you might be able to mine some of the conflicting resources that are coming out of that article. So it's going to give you a lot of good sources to kind of start with. And sixth, so if you are preempted and you find a relatively recent argument that makes the same argument and it comes to the same conclusion, and you don't want to argue the opposite side, or it covers every aspect of your topic, then you are preempted. So essentially, what it means to be preempted is you have found an article that is exactly on your issue, and there's nothing else that you can do to write about it that makes it unique. So if you want an excellent discussion on preemption checking and originality, you can look up 115 Harvard Law Review 1988. It's from 2002, and it goes into great detail about preemption checking and originality. So a great place to look. All right, so where do you begin? Once you come up with a note or comment topic that interests you, it's important first that you have to determine it hasn't been written about extensively. If it has been, then that will significantly increase the odds that your topic is already preempted. So it's best to begin by running a broad search for your topic in law reviews and journals and then filtering it down. So once you've come up with your topic, type in those key terms into the search box. So let's say I decided I wanted to write an article dealing with stalking on social media, maybe Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, any of those social media sites. So if I run a search, let's do stalking within 25 of social media or Facebook or Twitter. Run that search. We need to go into the secondary materials. So let's go to secondary materials. And then remember, within secondary materials, we're looking at not only law reviews and journals, but all of the other secondary sources. So we're looking at treatises, jurisprudence, CLE materials. So we are really just interested in looking at the law reviews and journals. And so if we select that filter, it's going to narrow us down to the 75 law review and journal articles specifically talking about stalking on social media. All right, so you want to have your topic narrowed down to the point where this general search will retrieve somewhere between 50 to 150 results. If you get too few results, it's probably going to indicate that your topic really isn't ripe yet and it's so novel that you're going to have little to say. It's going to be really hard to find sources to back up whatever argument you're trying to make. However, the other end of that spectrum is if you come out with too many results here, it's going to indicate that that topic is so done that it's going to be very difficult for you to bring something new and significant to this discussion unless the new issue has just occurred and it's substantial and there are lots of things currently just coming out to be said about that topic. And so remember, just because you're not preempted today doesn't mean a week from now you're not preempted. You could be writing an article on the same topic that someone at another school is writing a topic on. If they get published, let's say you guys are both writing your articles at the same time, but maybe they're just a little bit quicker with their research. They get it published within the next year, but you didn't get yours published for the next year and a half. Then technically you're preempted. Even though you were writing it at the same time, whoever gets it published first is going to preempt the other person. And so that's one thing to just remember. You need to be as efficient with your time as possible. But also, as you're writing your article, you want to make sure that you do this preemption check a few times. And so remember that you do have these alerts, so you can create an alert rather than coming back and running your preemption check time and time again. You can let the system automatically notify you if anything new about your topic has come up. And so if you click on this top little alert alarm clock button at the top of the page, you can create alerts based on searches that you've run. And so you can title it whatever you want. So maybe you could just title it after your article. Here you can see the search terms that the system will be monitoring it for. If I go to monitor, I only am interested in secondary materials and specifically law reviews and journals talking about my issue. And then in delivery, I can say, you know, I want these updates for the next year, maybe year and a half, 2 years, however long. And then you would want to select email and online. And so anytime there are new law review articles that specifically meet the criteria of the terms and connectors search that you ran, you will automatically get an email letting you know that a new article has just come out specifically meeting the requirements of that terms and connectors search. And so it's just a really easy way. It's kind of like having a paralegal or an assistant that's running these searches for you to let you just know, hey, something new has come out. You might want to check it out and make sure that you're not preempted so you don't waste the next 6 months writing only to find out that you were preempted while you were in the middle of your research. And so that in a nutshell is preemption checking. The very last thing I just wanted to point out is remember all of your history, all the searches that you run are automatically saved in your account for 90 days. And so if you click on this history drop-down menu, all of your searches from the last 90 days are automatically saved there. And so if you run any of these searches, but you maybe didn't have time to go through all the results, rather than going back to and applying all the filters that you did in order to get the results you were interested in looking at again, go to your history and you can go directly back to anything that you were previously looking at. So whether it was a specific document or a specific search that you ran, you can click on any of those tabs within your history and it'll automatically pull them back for you. All right, and then finally, so just remember you can save any of these things to folders. So as you come across relevant documents, make sure you're saving things to folders. You guys still have access to free printing on Lexis. So all these articles that you're looking at, feel free to print those. If you just wanted to save them to your computer or email them, maybe the editor that you're working with wanted to read an article that you cited to in your article or comment, your note, go ahead and feel free to use that email functionality and it'll send the email directly to that person. All right, guys, so now we have gone through all of the places on Lexis that you can look specifically to find note or comment topics. And then once you find a note or comment topic, you will want to do these preemption checks. So if you have any follow-up questions, definitely feel free to reach out to me. You can reach me via email. So it's just heather.caro@gmail.com. Remember, you have access to our customer support representatives 24/7. So you can call them at 1-800-45-LEXIS anytime you have a question. And then, of course, in this more drop-down menu, you also have the option to just chat with them live online. So don't forget about that feature as well. All right, so good luck while you are working on your article. And I look forward to helping you with any issues that may come up or questions that you have in the process. Thanks, guys.